Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, as you're probably all aware, Wuthering Waves 3.0 is going to be arriving in just a few weeks. And with the arrival of that version, we're going to have the arrival of 2 new playable characters. And Kuro Games has blessed us on this post-Thanksgiving day with news regarding their attributes and their weapons. And like we always do on this channel, whenever there's news regarding the release of a new pair of units, a lot of individuals might be wondering, is it time to save up? Are these characters that might be great for my account? Is this something that's going to be good for me as somebody that might be a bit low on Astrite or Lunite or Radiant Tides or whatever? And that's the question that we're going to try to answer today with the limited information that we do have. How potentially free-to-play or budget-friendly are the new units Lynae and Mornye going to be based off the existing weapon options that they're going to have in-game? So without further ado, let's go ahead and let's start having a bit of a conversation about the first unit up. And one thing that I'll just say up front is that this unit is looking very promising. So without further ado, let's go ahead, let's start breaking down why. All right, so for this example over here, I can't think of a better character to use other than the pistol character that was released in version 2.0, because we've got a new pistol character arriving in 3.0. So let's use Carlotta as sort of like the baseline, sort of like the foundation for our discussion over here. So one of the greatest assets that exists for any pistol user on the roster is not a signature like the one that you're seeing over here, but actually this bad boy, Static Mist. This is, without a doubt, in my opinion, possibly the best standard weapon in the game. It's only in competition with Emerald of Genesis, the standard 5-star sword. But aside from that, this or EOG easily takes the cake. And the reason for that is really simple. At a baseline, this weapon has absolutely amazing stats. Very high attack and high crit rate, combined with built-in ER. So when we kind of flip back and we take a look at Lynae over here, a lot of what people are thinking when it comes to her design and the things that she does is that, well, keyword design and the things that she does, which is create all of this shit. A lot of people are thinking that she's probably going to be somewhere along the lines of a DPS. However, there are still some individuals out in the space that, despite being a Spectral pistol user, she might actually be like a sub DPS. Maybe she's something like a Jinsei support. Maybe she actually attacks with every single attribute in the rainbow. She does coordinated attacks, right? And that's something that really makes Jinsei a character who has needed a support for a really long time. She's needed a best-in-slot support for a really long time, and some people are saying that it could be Lynae as well. Regardless of the role that's getting played over here, this weapon, Static Mist that I'm talking about, is going to be absolutely insane. Because I already said it provided ER, which is going to be good for any character to have energy to do their rotations, and when the character that's equipped this uses an outro skill, the recipient gains attack for 14 seconds. This essentially just provides a team buff to the next incoming character. And while if you're a DPS unit, like a Carlotta or a Galbraina, you just use the weapon for its base stats, the ER, attack, and crit rate, and clear all the content in the game, you can also use it too as a sub DPS and clear all the content in the game. And that's one of the wondrous joys of being a pistol character in Wuthering Waves. And I genuinely think it's one of the reasons for why Wuthering Waves doesn't release that many pistol units. It's because the standard weapon for the class is absolutely broken. It works if you're a DPS, because we've seen it used on Carlotta and Galbraina, and then it works if you're a sub DPS too. It works really well, because we've seen how it works on Chakona. So essentially, unless the role that this character plays is like a healer, you should be entirely well prepared just from being a free-to-play player who's just getting standard pulls. Because this is the cherry on top, ladies and gentlemen, and this is going to be the cherry on top for individuals who might either be new to Wuthering Waves or returning to Wuthering Waves. Guys, you can just pull it for free. You can literally just decide, hey, I've got my whatever number of standard banner pulls. I had 40 at some point in this version. I can just select the weapon and then go for it. And guess what, guys? You can never lose a 75-25 or a 50-50 on this banner. All you can do is win it. And sometimes shit like this will happen, right? Where you just get like back-to-backs. I've just decided to start collecting every single standard weapon because of how easy it is to get these. So yeah, that's what's been going on. I've just been grinding these out. I have like 10 copies of them at this point. And believe me when I say this, if you're a newer player or really just a returning player, you will have enough to secure a copy of this. If you haven't done so yet, again, my recommendation in every beginner's guide is to get this in EOG. If you haven't done it yet, it doesn't take that long to grab one either. So wherever you go, ladies and gentlemen, you will be set. That's going to be when it comes to static mist for pistol units. Now, let's talk about some of the other options that are going to be on the roster. And this is the nice part about Kuro Games putting in the gallery over here. You can just see every single weapon in the game. And so this is where I actually recommend you go as a player to do some comparisons and to do your own research. You don't need to have any of the weapons actually on your account to be able to draw some of these comparisons. So Static Mist over here is the weapon that we just looked at, right? We just talked about how amazing it was as a general use case. We also talked about how available it is. You should use this as sort of like your North Star, as your benchmark. If something isn't better than Static Mist, there's no point in ever building it. There's no point in ever investing towards it. And so that means that a lot of these weapons down here, you will never actually have any use case for them on your account. However, I will talk about some of the options that do appear to be close and just mention why they're probably not going to be better than Static Mist. So one of the speculations that I've made about Lynae and her kit is that she's likely going to be a character that engages with Spectro Frazzle. And if that is the case, Romance in Farewell will be a weapon that she can actually use. And then you can see at max rank, oh, it actually gives like a 32% attack bonus. Oh, it looks pretty decent. Like, oh, how could this thing be bad? This might be better than Static Mist. It's not, because it only has an 18% attack main stat. It has a lower base attack compared to Static Mist, which is 120 higher, and all it does is provide more attack. And so Static Mist is just gonna be better because of the higher crit and the higher base attack in the first place, and the built-in ER. So yeah, even this weapon, which is another budget option, which if she's Spectro Frazzle, it's gonna work with her, you don't even really want this one either. So yeah, I haven't talked a lot about what I think about Lynae when it comes to her kit being Spectro Frazzle for a reason, because it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter at all for this discussion. If she is a Spectro Frazzle DPS, then yeah, she'll just have a signature weapon that's specifically for Frazzle. But there's a reason why Kartithia works on EOG, and there's a reason why Zani works with the standard gauntlet. Because even if you have a specific damage type like Erosion or Frazzle in your kit, you can still use the standard weapons and get decent results. So yeah, all of these other weapons over here are probably just going to be behind Static Mist anyways in terms of relative performance, either through a combination of things like poor base stats or poor weapon effects. So you can basically rule out everything that's under this weapon here as a potential option, because that's how damn good Static Mist actually is. And you might view the lack of 4-star options as something that's a little bit player unfriendly, as something that's inherently predatory, but view it as the opposite. This is just the free-to-play standard 5-star premium option. This is just the free-to-play weapon being so absurdly overstated and overgeared that it makes all of the other 4-star options bad. So any sense of predatoriness that you might be feeling, any sense of, oh, the 4-star weapons are so useless, it's mainly because the free 5-star one is so good, so accessible, and so easy to have on your account. And that's actually more so player friendliness than player unfriendliness. Now, let's talk about some of the other signatures that we have on the screen over here. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, I don't really think that you're going to get much benefit out of these. So when you look at these 3 signatures, the first things that come to mind are, these are kind of specialized. This first one is Carlotta's, The Last Dance. And while it gives a general attack buff, it only gives a boost to resonance skill damage. And so, hey, If it turns out that Lynae is a resonance skill damage dealer, that would be great, because then you'd be able to use Carlotta's weapon on her. But if she's not, then this is just going to be a 12% attack stat stick. That's pretty much it. If she deals no resonance skill damage, it's just 12% attack, and then the crit that you're seeing over here. For Woodland Arya, it's also going to be just 12% attack, unless, for some godforsaken reason, Lynae's a Spectro character that inflicts arrow erosion. But maybe it'll happen because this is Chacona's signature, and Chacona is an arrow character that inflicts Spectro Frazzle. I think that would genuinely be hilarious if this character actually ends up being like a literal rainbow, and she actually inflicts every single debuff on the roster. And then she ends up being able to use Chacona's weapon, which gives you an arrow damage bonus and reduces the arrow resistance if they have arrow erosion on them. But I don't feel like that's something that Kuro is going to do. But if they do, this would be the character to do it, because she's literally all about every single color in the rainbow. And how funny of a joke would that be when you think about, because everyone says Genshin is just color mixing, right? People say Genshin's combat is just color mixing. What if they released a literal color mixing character in Wuthering Waves and they just apply every single negative status? I think that would be goofy as hell. It could be really, really, really interesting. But yeah, unless that's the case, this is just going to be a 12% attack stat stick once again. And now we've got Galbraina's weapon over here. And this one is also going to be a 12% attack stat stick, but it gives some bonuses for heavy attack and echo skill damage upon dealing damage of either type. And then an 8% defense ignore when both are active. This is my take. I don't think that Lynae is going to be our, heavy attack damage dealer or echo skill damage dealer. I don't think she's going to deal echo skill damage. I don't think she's going to deal heavy attack damage. And I don't think she's going to deal resonance liberate or intro skill damage. I think that Lynae is probably actually going to be close to best with just this one over here, Static Mist, or her signature. And the take over here is, I think that she's either going to be a basic attack focused character with pistols, or a resonance liberation focused character for pistols. One of those two. I don't think she's going to be resonance skill, and I don't think she's going to be heavy attack. Because one thing for certain is that we've only had 3 limited pistol characters. And one thing that Kuro really doesn't like doing is double dipping on damage types within a weapon class. They're actually okay with double dipping on damage types in the attribute class, kind of like how Camellia and Furlova, right, both deal havoc damage, or how Cantarella also deals basic attack damage, and so does Camellia. They don't really care about that much as long as there's role differentiation. But if you're a main DPS, they don't like main DPS characters dealing the same damage type as other characters, at least in the class. And that's why I think not resonance skill, not heavy, not echo skill. What does that leave us left? Basic or liberation damage. And I think that's where it's going to be. And so the end result is that I don't think any of the existing signatures, again, there's not really that many, are going to do much for her. So now let's have another discussion now. We've talked about pistols. We've talked about the use cases. We've talked about the player friendliness of Static Mist. That stuff is all there. Now let's talk about the Spectro attribute specifically, because that is going to be one of the unique things that Lynae has. Spectro actually is one of those attributes that has a surprising amount of support in some of the most non-clear places. So let's kind of go through the laundry list over here of what Spectro actually has in terms of team buffs. First things I want to talk about is they have Phoebe's Confession Mode skill. And this is actually one of the biggest reasons for why I think Lynae is going to be a Spectro Frazzle DPS. This Confession Mode outro skill does a couple of things. It reduces spectral res of the enemy by 10%. It grants 100% spectral frazzle damage amp. And it's also going to increase the damage interval, which makes it actually tick less. This is a whole 30-second buff. This is pretty big, actually, right? You need a character that deals spectral frazzle damage, can benefit from the spectral res reduction. That's where Zani comes in. However, this is the only character in the game that can use Phoebe's outro skill. And so what I was thinking is, Phoebe's on banner right now. It would make a ton of sense for one of the teams on release for Lynae to be Phoebe, Chisa, and then Lynae herself. And what better way to actually make a Spectral Frazzle team that works with Chisa than have a new DPS that's from the same place where Chisa's from? And God knows this unit in Confession Mode needs another fucking team. Because good God, it's absolutely brutal the fact that this character only has one team to work with. You combine that with the fact that Phoebe also has a secondary weapon effect that gives even 30% more amp on Spectrofrazzle damage. This is my take on what I think Lynae's kit is actually going to do. I think that Phoebe, her outro skill over here, reducing the tick rate of Spectrofrazzle is actually going to be a benefit. I think that Lynae is going to function similarly to Cartithia, where how Cartithia detonates arrow erosion stacks in her liberation form, right? She instantly triggers one instance of arrow erosion damage and then reduces the arrow erosion stack on the target hit by 1. I think Lynae is going to do the same thing, but for Spectrofrazzle. And so Phoebe's ability to apply a shit ton of stacks, right? And then her ability to reduce the tick rate so there's a high number of stacks still on the enemy. I think that's something that Lynae is actually going to be interacting with. So there are some of the buffs there. Now, we've got to talk about the other side of the equation over here, and that's going to be, well, the role that Spectro Rover plays. Because guess what, guys? Spectro Rover actually has a lot of really, really interesting stuff in their kit, too. But it's mainly at their S6, because they reduce the target Spectra resistance by another 10%. So it's like, it's more like an 18, 19% reduction when you combine this with Phoebe. But with those two characters, that's like minus 19% Spectra resistance. And that's something that's really cool as well that exists in the game. However, now we gotta get into the elephant in the room when it comes to Spectra. We've looked at the ways that they're able to improve the team's damage. Minus resistance is really cool. However, Spectro does not have a single liberation buffer in the game. Or sorry, not even liberation. They don't have a single outro buffer in the game. Yes, ladies and gentlemen. Like how you can go in and look at, you know, let's just say like Lupa's outro skill, right? Buffs or their incoming resonator will have their fusion damage amplified by 20%. The following character will have their havoc damage amplified by 20%. There's no buff like that in the game for fusion units. Yeah, it doesn't exist. You look at any fusion character on the roster, and they either are a support that just buffs the entire team, or they just don't have an outro skill that gives any buffs at all. And that's just the reality of the attribute. And so, in a similar way where, you know, she gets buffs from Spectro Rover and she gets buffs from Phoebe, well, this is also the other situation, guys. If this character isn't Spectrofrazzle, then how the fuck are they going to get buffs in the first place? How do they get buffs if they're not a Spectrofrazzle character? That's my take. Because there's not going to be some 4-star sub DPS, right? Or not going to be even a 5-star sub DPS that, like, buffs Spectro damage and then buffs basic attack. Because, again, I think she's going to be a basic attack or liberation unit. There's no buff Spectro and buff liberation damage. And if you guys are telling me, oh, Verena S4, go fuck yourself. You know that's not relevant to the discussion. We're talking about outro skills over here. Verena's S4 just gives a percentage damage boost that stacks with other damage boosts in the game. The main thing is that the roster doesn't even make sense for Lynae as a unit unless she's Spectrofrazzle. That's the main focus. If she's not, then what the hell is she going to work with in the second slot? What the hell is she going to work with? Because you're not going to put in this character to buff general Spectro damage. Don't worry, guys. People have tried it with Jinsei. People were like, oh, yeah. What if I go ahead and I stack up the minus 20 resistance buffs and I'll use her with my Jinsei team? There's a reason why you don't see any confession mode Phoebe Jinsei teams, because they're fucking bad. And that's part of the reason for why Jinsei's in a bit of a rough spot in the meta right now. There's no Spectro outro buffer. And so, yeah. I would take this as even like more confirmation based off the digging that we're doing that this is likely actually going to be a pure Spectrofrazzle unit. And with that in mind, guys, I think she's going to have some specialized teammates. So, you know how we talked a lot about how player-friendly she was going to be from the static mist, the weapon side? In a similar way, I do feel like this incoming character, Lynae, I am just having a bit of a tender feeling that her best-in-slot units will be Chisa and then Phoebe. Yes, I think this is really what's going to take place. And you know what I actually see coming up in the future? It's going to be Phoebe, Chisa, and Lynae. And then Phoebe's going to have like a extra, like a transfer student arc, and then get her own Star Torch outfit. And then that's actually meant to be like the Star Torch team. That's what I actually see coming up in the future, because no other team composition, no other banner schedule even works. Because, guys, it's basically confirmed. It's basically confirmed. Otherwise, what role is this character going to play? Is she going to be a support? Well, I guess that's great. But if she's a DPS, I think she's going to be Spectro Frazzle. It makes sense for her to release as a Spectro Frazzle DPS. And if she's not Spectro Frazzle, but she is a DPS, then her kit makes no fucking sense in the game, and then nobody will buff her. But in a similar vein, this also means, guys, she's going to be a little bit expensive. I do think that she's going to feel like she needs a lot of those premium teammates, and it will all be based off of how well she's able to sustain stack uptime by herself, and how good is her damage when she doesn't have Chisa on her team. How good is her damage when she doesn't have a Phoebe on her team. And I do think that if we do get news about her having Spectro Frazzle Reliance, you will all simply wait on her pull value a lot longer so that you don't end up in a Zoni situation. And I'm hoping that when Lynae comes out and she is Spectro Frazzle, if that occurs, then her performance with Spectro Rover is much closer to best in slot than it is with Zoni as well. Because you replace Phoebe with Spectro Rover in the Zoni teams, it's cooked, brother. It's cooked. And I'm just hoping that for their 3.0 unit, because Carlotta was one of the most budget-friendly units we've ever had in the history of the game, that they do a similar thing with Lynae. But we'll just have to see, but I trust Kuro Games with their debut 3.0 banner to not fuck things up. But that's going to be her. Now, that was a bit of a long-winded discussion, but we kind of uncovered more and more layers of what to think about when it comes to Lynae as the discussion kept going. Now, let's do a bit of a gear switch and talk about the next upcoming 3.0 unit, and that is going to be Mornye. And so the news that we've gotten about Mornye is pretty simple. She's going to be a fusion Broadblade, and I'm going to be real over here. This is perhaps one of the most interesting reveals we've had in the history of the game. And so we're going to take a bit of a different approach to this discussion. Rather than talking about her weapon first, we're going to talk about her attribute. Because one thing that Mornye is going to have as like a buff in her back pocket is simply the fact that this character exists in the game. Yes, guys, Lupa. This unit is fucking broken. I can't even describe to you how insanely broken this unit is. She has 15% fusion resistance ignore. 3% for every teammate on your team. 6% if all three are fusion. That goes up to 15. Then her liberation gives 18% attack and 20% fusion damage bonus. Awesome. You add up all these buffs together, and this unit just ends up greatly amplifying so much of your fusion damage to the point where it's absolutely absurd. And the only downside of this unit is that she needs a sustainer. That's a fusion. She needs a healer on her team. That's a fusion character. And fortunately, while she has had Brant to line up that role on the roster to be the healer, these two have undeniably felt tied to the hip. And one thing that some groups of players, gacha game players, don't like doing is they don't like pulling dudes. That's not really something that they're huge fans of. It makes them very, very, very unhappy. They get very frustrated. And so, right off the rip, I'm just going to say, I feel like the role that Mornye is probably going to have is to be the female version of Brant. Yes, guys, I do think that Mornye is actually going to be the fusion version of Brant. That she's going to have some sort of like healing potential in her kit, and she's meant to not necessarily replace him, but be a side grade to him in most of the teams. Because one thing that this character is known for, ladies and gentlemen, is dealing a disgusting amount of damage. Think along the lines of 300 to 400 to 500k when he drops this anchor on enemies. Because it has like a 1300% motion value on the final hit, and he buffs his attack by like absurd amounts, up to, well, I'll just show you the number, up to 2600 during his ultimate. So yeah, when you stack up all of his attack buffs and stuff, his anchor ends up doing like 400, 500k damage, and he ends up being one of the most damaging characters, despite being the healer on the Mono Fusion team. So I'm actually hoping, and I have full confidence in Kuro Games, to just better balance out the damage portfolio of this character. Because yes, from what I'm seeing, I'll put almost money on the idea that this is going to be a healing character. Because nothing else really makes sense to this degree. We've just had a fusion DPS that released in the game right here, guys. So I don't think when we just had a fusion DPS release in 2.7, they're going to release one in 3.0. They might. And then we had the fusion support in 2.4, and then a fusion healer in 2.1. That's a hybrid, not really even a healer to the degree that most people are thinking, because their buffs only go to one person. I'm thinking that Mornye is actually going to be kind of similar to like a shorekeeper, right? And the speculation that we're going off of is really, really, really loose. But she does say some shit about, like, calculations and stuff like that. And Shorekeeper summons, like, a Stellar Realm and shit. So I'm thinking that she's actually going to be way more buff-focused and focus more on amplifying the damage of her team. She'll still do a similar amount of damage as Brant, but it'll be her teammates dealing the damage as opposed to her. So I think that's something that could probably make a good bit of sense, and that would give a way different feel for the mono fusion teams versus having this guy drop down with 500,000 damage on his anchor. But that's probably something that makes a lot of sense. However, I'm not entirely sure if that's the direction that Kuro Games is going to go with. And this is perhaps the most important one, it's entirely possible that this character is being designed completely separate from the idea of monofusion teams and is being designed for teams that don't even include Lupa in the first place. That's something that we've got to be realistic about as well, because it could be that what if she's the Jinsei support, motherfucker? What if she's got coordinated attacks, deals no damage, and then like buffs resonant skills or something, and then doesn't have healing? That's entirely something that she could do as well. But it's important for us to talk about the dynamics of Lupa, the dynamics of her on the roster, simply because when it comes to fusion, she changes everything to such a ridiculous degree. And I forgot to mention the fact that her weapon also gives 24% fusion damage bonus, and then her Sonata set also gives 15% fusion damage bonus as well. So remember those buffs that I talked about? You can add on an additional like fucking 39% fusion damage on top of it. Let's just say it's frankly a little bit goddamn ridiculous, everything that this character does. So, yeah, that's a little bit when it comes to Mornye's role. Like I said before, being a fusion character is a bit of a buff, but being a fusion character and noticing the role that Lupa is kind of missing on some of her teams, and the way she kind of conveniently fills in the gap, and it has been a long time since we had a last fusion healer, that's where I'm going when it comes to her design. Now, let's talk a little bit about the weapon over here, and this one's going to be really, really, really interesting. Let's just start off the discussion by taking a look at the gallery once again and just looking at the Broadblades that we have available. So I'm going to be honest over here. Broadblades are the one weapon in the game where it feels like we have a million different options. It's a million different options. And if the character is a healer, I'm going to be real with you, ladies and gentlemen. None of them sound particularly good. And this is how we'll start breaking down the reasons for why. Basically, every single Broadblade in the game really focuses on a damage type. And there's only one option over here, Wildfire Mark, that seems like it could actually be decent. But let's go through all the other options first. So Lustrous Razor. This thing is essentially going to be fucking useless unless she deals Resonance Liberation of some type or has really, really, really high attack requirements. Because yeah, this thing basically just gives ER. And if the character is a healer, it does nothing. Chisa has the bonus of dealing Liberation damage, and so she at least is able to get slight buffs from this weapon. But assuming that Mornye doesn't deal liberation damage, because I don't think they're going to make this one that good on her, yeah, it's just going to be a little bit rough. In most situations, I'm imagining it might actually just be better to use Discord. And Discord is going to be the concerto weapon that is in every single class. Basically, the rectifier version of Discord is something that you guys are familiar with. It's variation. So, if this character is a healer and they really value a faster rotation time, this might be the way to go. So, if you have extra copies of this, if you got a couple that are hiding, you know, in your backpack somewhere, try to get this bad boy to R5. Just see how it's going to perform on her, because like we've seen for a lot of healers or buffers that are in this game, sometimes it can be better to not actually slot them for any damage at all and just slot them for the fastest rotation time possible. And Discord, again, this weapon over here, I'll just move my chat for a second so you guys can all see it. That's the concerto weapon. That equivalent This is the Broadblade equivalent of variation. So it could be something that's really, really good. All of these other weapon types, or all these other weapons, guys, they're just stat sticks. This is the resonant skill damage stat stick. This is the heavy attack damage stat stick. There's another heavy attack damage stat stick. And great, a liberation damage stat stick. The only one that might actually be great on Mornye is Wildfire Mark, Lupa's signature, because this gives stat stick level effects to liberation damage, but by simply dealing a heavy attack, you can give 24% fusion damage to your entire team for 30 seconds. And I'm gonna be real over here. You might just want this weapon on your Mornye at a baseline, because if you activate it, you'll be able to buff her own fusion damage by 24%. It could be good. You'll also buff the team as well, but chances are, maybe Lupa's already going to be on your Mornye's team, so it's not even like a good idea to use this, and you're just going to want to combine this with Mornye's signature. But, yeah. I'm just saying off the bat, the idea of a Broadblade healer, you can already begin to imagine, it's a little bit weird. It's a little bit off, but the vision is there, assuming that you have copies of Discord, or that you even have Discord with you, because that series, the Concerto Energy Weapon series, it's something that comfortably pretty much always works when a character is a support. But guys, do keep in mind that it's really easy for Kuro Games to change the script. Examples of how the script can be changed are pretty simple. If Mornye simply has some built-in restrictions into her design that require certain stat thresholds to buff her team, then yeah, we might be in for a bit of a doozy. Think, for example, Chuyan's passive over here, which requires him to have a specific amount of crit rate. And if he doesn't have a crit rate weapon, it suddenly becomes much harder for him to buff his team. And if Mornye has something similar to that with like crit in her kit, and then when you look at the fact that she needs to like calculate and get all this precision and stuff, that sounds like she might need high crit rate. Just saying, if she has those built-in stat thresholds in her kit that make it feel like she needs a signature weapon to be able to provide her buffs to the team, think this fucking midget who requires 70% crit rate to give her 200 attack buff to the team. You guys remember that shit? You basically need a fucking signature on this character to be able to provide her buff to the team. Otherwise, disgusting rolls on her echoes. And it's just like, bro, fuck that shit. It's annoying as hell. And like, you gotta giga invest and the character does no damage. That's Rosia. And if she has that sort of restriction built into her kit, Mornye, that's gonna be a bit rough. Now, let's talk a little bit about the overall free-to-play friendliness of her. I think that Mornye is going to be closer to a specialized unit. That's the take that I'm beginning to see right now, and that's where I'll hedge my bet for this upcoming version, 3.x. Because I've already mentioned that I feel like she's a bit of a Brant side grade and a bit of like a tertiary Lupa support, I'm gonna be real, that's kind of the only role that's missing on the Fusion roster right now. And if that's the case, where it feels like you want Lupa to work with her, I'm not gonna say that the character is inherently free-to-play or budget-friendly at all. Because, well, the thing is that Lupa started feeling a lot more necessary for all these specially designed Fusion teams to work, and well, that's inherently expensive. However, if Mornye is not a character that's meant to work with Lupa and she builds up a completely separate archetype of her own, God, maybe she's a fucking, well, I was gonna say maybe she's a Havoc Bane DPS. Hey, if she's like a Fusion Burst DPS or a Fusion Burst enabler, then you can take everything I've said and throw it out the window because, well, Lupa is probably not gonna work that well with Fusion Burst because you're gonna want Chisa on that team. However, we'll just have to wait and see. And the fact that this character is Fusion by itself, I think is telling a lot, especially when we all know that a common concern for this character is the fact that she has to be played with Brant. Because male characters are a funny thing in a game like this, and having them be necessary for people to play their favorite waifus can be an experience that gets people very, very, very angry. So that might be something that Kuro Games is looking to address. I kind of am prioritizing that, but maybe I'm being a little bit too pessimistic about all the things that are going on. All right. Now, I think the last thing that I needed to cover, because I believe that I missed it, was ideas on like the 4-star Broadblades. So like I mentioned before, Discord is probably the only one that makes sense for a support. And I would just say, if you're ever in the ballpark of thinking about using any of these, just use Lustrous Razor instead. or just pray that you're gonna get lucky on Discord, or even, God forbid, instead of using Discord, you can try using this bad boy. The shit that you got from Mount Firmament. Yeah, it gives you a little bit of concerto, but yeah. That's gonna be it for this one, ladies and gentlemen. That's gonna be it for our breakdown of all the new drip marketing, all the new weapons, all the new details, all of that. And I'm gonna be real over here. There's still a lot of speculation. There's no confirmed news yet. But this lineup of characters could be some of the most transformative to the game that we've seen. And I'm just hoping that when it comes to their implementation, it doesn't feel like you need a bunch of other units to make these 3.x units work. I would like them to feel a lot more standalone, because I think that's important for a 3.x version, or really a 0.0 version, an X.0 version. That's what 3.0 is going to be. And if these characters end up feeling like you need to have played the game for a long time to make use out of them, that's going to really piss off, or I think really feel unfair for a lot of newer people to the game. So we'll just have to see. Carlotta was a great character that got a lot done. I'm just hoping that Lynae and Mornye feel a bit more similar. Or really, I'm just hoping that Mornye doesn't feel like Rosia. How about this? How about this, Kuro? Whatever you did with this unit, because this unit also released in 2.0, whatever you did with this character, just like, don't do it again. She's so bad.